What if the quiet man you just arrested for causing a scene in a diner turned out to be one of the most lethal operatives in U.S. military history? No one in the courtroom expected the man in handcuffs to become the epicenter of a national reckoning. But when a four-star general walked in behind him and dropped the truth, the walls of silence began to collapse. This isn't just a story about injustice, it's about the man they tried to erase. And what happens when ghosts come back to life? In a Black Speech Bubble, stick around, hit that subscribe, and drop a comment if you believe heroes don't always wear medals sometimes. They wear county blues. No one in that small Kansas courtroom expected history to walk in wearing handcuffs and a prison-issue jumpsuit. But when 54-year-old Caleb Marsh, a quiet black man with deep-set eyes and hands hardened by years of work, was led through the doors in Clay County blues, the whispering began. The judge didn't know who he was. Neither did the prosecutors. Even the officers who arrested him had no idea what they'd done. They thought Caleb was just another homeless veteran, another face from the shadows. But 9 minutes later, the doors opened again, and everything changed. A tall figure in a perfectly pressed dress uniform strode in. General Thomas Braxton, for stars on his shoulders, medals gleaming in the light, and a look in his eyes that made the air go still. What he said next didn't just shake the courtroom, it ignited a firestorm across the country. But to understand what brought the nation to this moment, we need to go back to a summer afternoon in Garnett, Kansas. The sun beat down hard as Caleb leaned over the engine compartment of an old Ford F-150, its hood propped open like a metal yawn. His hands moved with practiced ease through the tangled mess of belts and rusting parts. The truck belonged to Carol Jenkins, a retired librarian whose husband had passed away 3 years earlier. Carol stepped outside, carrying a glass of lemonade, sweating in the heat. "Mr. Marsh, thought you might need this," she called gently. Caleb straightened, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly and low. He took the drink with a slight nod, never quite meeting her eyes. Carol smiled. "You're a blessing, you know. I don't know what this town would do without you fixing things for folks who can't afford the shop." Caleb gave a half-smile, almost invisible. "Just staying busy," he murmured before returning to the engine. Nearby, a group of kids pedaled past on bicycles. One of them, grinning, called out, "Hey, Ghost, you think that truck's gonna fly?" Caleb didn't respond, but the tension in his shoulders softened slightly. The nickname had followed him for years. Ghost. The kids started it, mostly because of how he moved, quiet, barely noticed, disappearing before anyone could get a second look. Only the children used it. Adults just called him that man who helps with engines. By late afternoon, the Ford roared back to life. Caleb shut the hood with a soft thunk, picked up his tools, and started walking toward Millie's Diner, just off Main Street. His routine never changed. Help people during the day, eat at Millie's in the evening, return to a tiny house on the edge of town before sundown. No TV, no visitors, just silence. The bell above the diner door jingled as he stepped inside. Heads turned, then turned back. Caleb nodded at no one and took his usual booth by the window. He ordered the black coffee and meatloaf special, same as every night, and waited in silence. 20 minutes into his meal, the front door slammed open. A red-faced man in his 40s staggered in, stinking of alcohol. His voice rang out like a shotgun blast. "Get lost, old man. Nobody wants your kind begging around here." Everyone turned. At the door stood an older man in worn fatigues, holding a faded veteran's cap in his trembling hands. "I just wanted a cup of coffee," he mumbled. "I got money." "Yeah, right," the drunk sneered. "Go crawl back under your bridge." The drunk shoved him. The veteran stumbled. Caleb set down his fork. Silence settled over the diner like a thick fog. Even the clatter of dishes in the kitchen stopped. Caleb rose without a word and walked over. The movement was almost invisible, too smooth, too quiet for a man his size. He stepped between the drunk and the veteran and offered his sandwich. "This ain't your business," the drunk slurred. Caleb didn't flinch, didn't speak. He simply stood there, body like a wall, shielding the vet. "Thanks, brother," the older man whispered, taking the sandwich with shaking hands. "I'm talking to you," the drunk snarled, jabbing a finger into Caleb's chest. Caleb looked at the finger, then looked up. "You should go home," he said evenly. "Sleep it off." The drunk's face twisted in rage. Before he could respond, the door opened again. Officer Troy Daniels walked in early 30s, buzz cut, badge gleaming. He'd built a reputation in Garnett for being tough, especially with black residents. "What's going on here?" Daniels asked, hand drifting toward his belt. "This guy's causing trouble," the drunk said, pointing at Caleb. "Threaten me." "He's lying," said Sandra, the waitress. That drunk was harassing a homeless vet, and Mr. Marsh stepped in to help. Daniels didn't look at her. His eyes locked on Caleb. "ID," he said, palm out. Caleb stood still. "You don't want to do this," he said calmly. Daniels' jaw clenched. "Excuse me? Is that a threat?" "No," Caleb replied. "It's just a fact. I said ID. Now." Daniels' hand shifted to his holster. Phones came out. Diners began recording. "Officer," an older man at the counter said, rising, "there's no problem here." "Sir, step back." Daniels barked. "Last chance," he snapped at Caleb. "ID or you're under arrest." Caleb moved slowly. Every gesture telegraphed, deliberate. He reached for his wallet. Then Daniels changed his mind. "Get on the ground. Hands where I can see them." A ripple ran through the diner. Children pressed against the windows outside. Phones recorded every second. Caleb hesitated, glanced around, then dropped to his knees and lay flat. Daniels cuffed him harshly. As Caleb was let out, a Vietnam vet at the counter muttered, "Wait a second. I know that man." But Daniels kept moving, Miranda rights spilling out like broken promises. At the Clay County Sheriff's Office, the booking process was mechanical. Prints, mugshot, charge sheet, resisting arrest, disturbing the peace. Caleb didn't speak. And that silence? It scared them. When his prints were scanned, a red alert flashed across the screen, an encrypted flag from the Department of Defense. "Hold for federal inquiry. Immediate verification requested." Sheriff Clayton Reeves scoffed. "Another system glitch. These things been buggy all week." He clicked dismiss. Across town, Detective Marcus M.J. Judd, one of only 2 black detectives in the county, was finishing paperwork when the arrest report landed on his desk. The name hit him like a punch, Caleb Marsh. He typed the name into the system. What came back was bizarre, heavily redacted records, DOD seals, and entire sections marked classified. Eyes only. MJ leaned back, rubbing his chin. "Who the hell are you?" He picked up the phone, called an old Army buddy at Veterans Affairs. "Reed, I need a favor. Name's Caleb Marsh. He got booked tonight in my jurisdiction. Everything's blacked out. You know him?" A long pause. "I don't know him personally," the voice on the line said. "But I've heard the name." "What kind of stories?" "The kind people whisper. The kind you don't write down." "Is he dangerous?" A longer pause. "No," the voice said. "But the people who want him gone? They are." MJ hung up, unease gnawing at his gut. Across the country, in San Diego, Julia Marsh, Caleb's estranged daughter, was sipping wine on her apartment balcony when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. They arrested the ghost. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She hadn't spoken to her father in over a decade, not since the silence between them turned into a canyon neither could cross. She stared at the text. "Dad, what did you do?" The late-night air in Garnett, Kansas was still and heavy, the kind of quiet that came just before a storm, not one in the sky, but in the very fabric of the town. In a small, dimly lit corner office of the Clay County Sheriff's Department, Detective Marcus M.J. Judd stared at his monitor. The name on the screen glowed back at him like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. Caleb Marsh. Redacted documents. Department of Defense watermarks. Seals he didn't even recognize. The man was listed as non-active personnel under a clearance level MJ couldn't even access. MJ picked up his phone again, this time dialing someone higher, Frank Delgado, a friend who now worked as a senior records analyst at the VA in D.C. "I need you to check something off the books," MJ said quietly. Frank chuckled on the other end. "You always call after midnight? You notice that?" "I wouldn't if it wasn't serious." "Name is Caleb Marsh. Arrested tonight in my district. I ran his name through our databases, got back more black tape than a crime scene." The laughter died. There was a long pause. "MJ," Frank said finally, "you didn't book him, did you?" "No, an officer named Daniels did." "You need to walk away, man." MJ frowned. "Why?" "Because if it's really him, then they're already watching." "Who's they?" Frank hesitated, voice dropping to a whisper. "Black Echo." That name meant nothing to MJ, but it hit like a gut punch anyway. "What the hell is Black Echo?" he asked. "You don't want to know." "I already do." Frank sighed. It's a ghost file, man. Something from over a decade ago. Sierra Leone. Biological weapons, deniable assets, operatives who didn't officially exist. Marsh. If it's the same guy, then yeah. But listen, MJ, some ghosts are better left undisturbed. If Marsh is really the one they called the ghost sniper, they're gonna come hard to bury this. MJ leaned back in his chair. He'd worked homicide, gang units, narcotics. But this wasn't police work. This was war. At a Pentagon war room in Arlington, Virginia, General Thomas Braxton stood at the head of a steel conference table. The room was stark, flooded with harsh fluorescent light. Maps of Eastern Europe and the South China Sea covered the screens behind him. Braxton, 67, was still a towering figure, silver-haired, weathered, but sharp-eyed. He commanded a kind of quiet power that didn't need to raise its voice. In the middle of a briefing about troop repositioning in Poland, his aide, Captain Reynolds, interrupted. "Sir, urgent alert. Priority Alpha." Braxton frowned. "From where?" "Clay County, Kansas." Braxton took the secure tablet from Reynolds, his face hardening as he read. The screen displayed one name. Subject, Caleb Marsh, positive ID match, 99.8%. He set the tablet down and looked up at the room. "Clear the briefing," he ordered. "Everyone out. Now." Once the room emptied, Colonel Naomi Quinn, his longtime chief of staff, remained behind. "You already know what this is, don't you?" she asked. Braxton nodded. "They arrested him." "Jesus," Quinn whispered. "Why?" "Wrong place, wrong cop, wrong moment." Quinn hesitated. "What do you want to do?" "Everything," Braxton said, voice iron cold. "I want every piece of that arrest report. Body cam footage. Booking details. Every name attached. And I want it yesterday." In a sleek office tower in Dallas, Colonel Vincent Klein, now CEO of Ardent Strategic Solutions, a private military contractor, sat in silence watching the alert on his phone. The arrest had triggered an internal security protocol. A flashing red notification on his secure comms channel read, "Ghost signal detected. Code, Black Echo." He stood abruptly. "They found him," he said aloud to no one. "That damn ghost." His assistant, a young man in a crisp suit, entered just as Klein turned to a wall-mounted panel and activated a secure communications feed. "Get me the team in Nevada." Quietly, he barked. "Tell them it's time to move." "Move on who, sir?" the assistant asked. "On a problem that should have been dealt with 15 years ago." Back in Kansas, the morning sun rose over the jailhouse where Caleb Marsh sat motionless in his cell, eyes open, body still. Other inmates had learned quickly to leave him alone. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He simply waited. Across town, Julia Marsh sat at a diner nursing a black coffee. Her laptop was open, notes scattered across the table. She had driven all night. Now she was preparing to enter the sheriff's office not as a daughter, but as an investigative journalist. She had already published exposés that brought down corrupt city officials, pharmaceutical fraud rings, and even a sitting state senator. But this was different. This was family. She took a breath, stood up, and walked into the sheriff's department like a storm building strength. The deputy behind the desk looked up, confused. "Can I help you?" "Yes," she said, flashing her credentials. "I'm Julia Marsh, senior reporter for the Tribune. I'm here to speak with Sheriff Reeves regarding the arrest of my father." The deputy blinked. "Your father?" "Caleb Marsh." Recognition sparked in the man's eyes. "Sheriff's not taking interviews on active cases." Julia didn't blink. "Then I'll write that he refused comment on a civil rights case involving a decorated Marine. Should make for an interesting headline." The deputy's radio crackled. "Sheriff says no press access." Julia smiled tightly. "Then tell Sheriff Reeves that if I don't get in to see my father in the next hour, I'll be calling every federal lawyer on my contact list and releasing the preliminary story to syndication by noon." She stepped outside, dialing another number. "Ben, it's Julia. I need that favor." "Yes, Pentagon clearance." "No, I'm not joking." Back inside the department, Sheriff Reeves rubbed his temples. "This woman is going to bring national attention to a drunk and disorderly charge," he muttered. "It's more than that," MJ said, stepping into the room. He tossed a flash drive onto the desk. "What's this?" Reeves asked. "Footage." Diner across the street caught the whole thing. Caleb didn't resist, didn't threaten. Daniels lied. Reeves didn't move. "Are you sure?" "Play it." Reeves did. and what he saw made the blood drain from his face. At Fort Bragg, deep inside a secure intelligence facility, a meeting of high-ranking officers and Department of Defense legal advisors had begun. "Do we extract him?" a Navy captain asked. "We can't," said a CIA liaison. "Media's already circling. His daughter's a journalist with a national profile." "Then neutralize?" "Too late. He's already triggered public attention. Any move now, and we're caught." "What's the fallback?" The civilian at the end of the table stood. "We bury him. Not physically. Institutionally. Psychological discrediting. Frame it as PTSD, instability, delusions. And what if that fails? Then we pray he stays quiet." That same morning, Julia was finally granted a visitation. Inside a stark room, she stared across the table at her father. 15 years of silence stretched between them. Caleb looked rough, gaunt, hollow-eyed, but unbroken. "You look terrible," Julia said. He managed the ghost of a smile. "You look good." She folded her arms. "Why didn't you ever call?" "Safer that way," Caleb said quietly. "For who?" "You. For you." Julia's voice cracked. "I was 15 when Mom died. I needed you." "I was following orders," he said, almost inaudibly. "Whose?" she asked. He looked away. "And that silence?" That was the answer. Back at the Pentagon, Braxton sat alone in his office, watching archived footage from Sierra Leone. Images he'd locked away years ago. Villages in flames. Children convulsing. American contractors in hazmat suits documenting the effects of something never meant to be seen. Then came the voice of a soldier over the comms. "Target acquired. Civilians present." "Repeat, civilians are present." Braxton shut off the footage. He picked up the phone. "Julia Marsh," he said when her voicemail clicked on. "My name is General Thomas Braxton. Your father's arrest was not a mistake. It was a warning. You're in danger. Call me back." He hung up, knowing full well she wouldn't believe him yet. But she would, very soon. Because Black Echo wasn't over. It was just waking up. The air in Julia Marsh's motel room was thick with silence, broken only by the scratch of her pen against paper. She had filled half a notebook already with names, dates, locations, anything connected to her father. Across the room, her phone buzzed again. Another message from an anonymous source. He saved lives. They buried him for it. She stared at the screen, then grabbed her keys. 2 hours later, she was sitting at the bar of a truck stop diner off I-70 in central Kansas. Her target sat alone in the far corner, nursing a beer. A Marine Corps tattoo peeked out from under the rolled sleeve of his flannel. Julia approached. "Mark Webb?" she asked. The man looked up slowly, eyes wary. "Who's asking?" "Julia Marsh," she said. "Caleb Marsh's daughter." The bottle froze halfway to his lips. "Didn't know he had a daughter," Webb muttered. "He never talked about family." Julia nodded. "That sounds about right." She slid into the seat next to him. "I'm not here for small talk. I want to know about Operation Black Echo." Webb paled. "Never heard of it." "Yes, you have," she said, pulling up the headline on her phone showing Caleb's arrest. "He's in jail. Pentagon scrambling. I want to know why." Webb drained the beer in one long gulp. "You really don't know what you're poking at, do you? Then explain it to me." The bartender walked away, and Webb leaned in. "Off the record?" "Marine to Marine's daughter," Julia said. He studied her a moment, then nodded slowly. "Your father saved my life. Sierra Leone, 2010. Operation Black Echo. We were sent in to neutralize a warlord who supposedly had bioweapons. Only it wasn't just a kill mission, it was a field test. Somebody up the chain wanted data. They wanted to see how the agents worked on civilians. They let it happen." Julia blinked. "You're saying they tested biological weapons on innocent people?" Webb nodded grimly. "And when things went sideways, they blamed your father for going off script. But he didn't go rogue. He saved 47 people, including children. He disobeyed a direct order to do it. That's why they erased him." Julia sat back, stunned. "So they turned him into a ghost." "Worse," Webb said, his voice low. "They made sure the world would never know he existed." Back in her motel room, Julia wrote until her hand cramped. She had spoken to 3 more Marines that night. All told the same story, each reluctant, each haunted. A man with perfect precision, perfect control, and an unwavering moral compass. Across town, District Attorney Layla Tran sat in her office reviewing body cam footage again. The clip showed a calm man offering food, not a threat. No raised voice, no aggression. It didn't match Officer Daniels' report at all. She tapped her pen against the desk, uneasy. Something about this didn't sit right. Meanwhile, inside the federal systems, Caleb Marsh's arrest had triggered more than just an alert. It was a beacon, lighting up buried files, encrypted threads, and a long-dormant chain of emergency protocols. In Dallas, Colonel Klein was already acting. He paced his office, issuing instructions through a private secure line. Get me the assets. Discredit him before he can speak. Mental health files, fabricated if necessary. We'll bury him again. This time deeper. In Atlanta, Julia's editor called. I'm pulling you off the Marsh story, he said. Too close. You're compromised. She didn't argue. She just hung up, stared at the blinking cursor on her screen, then began uploading her first article independently. Who is the man they call the ghost? It spread like wildfire. By nightfall, hashtags like hashtag Free Caleb Marsh and hashtag Hero Not Threat were trending. Veterans shared photos. Journalists started digging. Civil rights organizations began calling the sheriff's office. Outside the jail, a small crowd gathered, candles flickering in the Kansas wind. Inside his cell, Caleb sat motionless. He hadn't moved in hours. He didn't need to. Every breath he took was a defiance. Every second he stayed silent was louder than any scream. At 2 a.m., the silence broke. The security feed flickered. For less than a second, static. When it resumed, everything looked normal, but it wasn't. Someone was watching through those cameras now. Not the jail. Not the sheriff. Someone else. In a Pentagon conference room, General Braxton stood staring at a screen. It started, he said. We don't control this anymore. His aide looked up. Should we contain the leak? No, Braxton replied. We let it spread. It's the only thing that might keep him alive. Meanwhile, Julia received an envelope under her door. No name. Just a flash drive inside and one line of text. Watch alone. She did. The video showed a man in his 50s, pale, sweating. My name is Samuel Avery, former intelligence analyst. I worked on Operation Black Echo. What I'm about to say will probably get me killed. He described how Caleb had gone against orders, how he had saved civilians, how the higher-ups, instead of honoring him, buried the operation. If you're watching this, I'm probably already dead, he ended. Julia checked. He had died 3 days after filming the message. Single car accident. Remote road. No witnesses. No skid marks. Just gone. The next morning, she stood outside the sheriff's department with a press badge clipped to her collar and determination in her eyes. I'm here to see my father, she told the deputy. And if you say no, I'm bringing a storm with me. They let her in. What they didn't know was that the storm was already here. And Caleb Marsh the ghost was just getting started. The Kansas sky was unusually heavy that morning, as if it sensed what was about to unfold. Inside the isolation cell of Clay County Detention Center, Caleb Marsh remained motionless, eyes staring straight ahead at nothing. Outside, the crowd had more than doubled overnight. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with civilians holding signs. Free Caleb, justice for the ghost. This is what erasure looks like. In District Attorney Layla Tran's office, unease was mounting. She had reviewed the body cam footage over 24 times, each time more troubling than the last. No aggression. No resistance. Nothing that matched Officer Daniel's sworn report. Then, a thick encrypted file landed in her inbox from an anonymous source. No explanation. Just a video attachment from a security camera outside the diner, revealing everything. Caleb standing up, offering food to a homeless vet, calmly intervening. Seconds later, he was slammed to the ground without provocation. Layla flagged the case for emergency review, brushing off the sheriff's pressure to close it quietly. What she didn't know was that at that same moment, in a restricted desert compound in Nevada called Station Gray, a tactical team was being mobilized. No insignias. No names. Only a verbal command. Prepare for internal transfer of Subject 547. No trace. No public record. Inside the Dallas headquarters of Ardent Strategic Solutions, Colonel Vincent Klein tossed a file across the room. In this now, he snapped. Move him to Station Gray. Tonight. And make it look like suicide, PTSD, stress, whatever gets them off our back. One junior officer hesitated. Sir, the public is watching closely now. Any misstep, all the more reason to control the ending, Klein interrupted. If Marsh opens his mouth, we don't just lose contracts. We lose our entire world. Meanwhile, deep in a signal-cloaked cabin in northern Missouri, freelance hacker Zuri Ellis worked 3 monitors at once. She had been tapped by Julia Marsh when institutional channels began collapsing. After nearly 48 hours of tracking encrypted comms, Zuri finally looked up, eyes hard. They're moving him. Station Gray. Midnight. And they're not planning on him arriving alive. Julia gripped the phone, her voice low. Can we stop it? Not physically, Zuri replied. But we can make it too public to execute. She opened 4 secure channels and began dumping classified files. Within an hour, everything Operation Black Echo documents, photos, personnel rosters, the Samuel Avery video confession flooded the internet. Emails with Klein's name. Redacted field orders to test bioweapons on civilians. Audio from missions gone sideways. And above it all, the name, Caleb Marsh, the man who disobeyed orders to save dozens. The news exploded like wildfire. Hashtag Black Echo, hashtag Truth of the Ghost trended nationwide. Veterans posted pictures. Journalists went live. Civil rights attorneys filed for emergency injunctions. Congressional aides requested urgent hearings. A retired general posted an open letter demanding the operation be declassified. At a federal courthouse in Kansas City, Caleb's public defender and a coalition of civil rights lawyers presented their argument. This is not a transfer. It is a targeted elimination of a key witness to war crimes. 45 minutes later, the judge slammed the gavel. Transfer halted. Immediate federal oversight ordered. Reinforced security around the subject. Station Gray under review. At Station Gray, lead psychological officer Agent Ruth Mercer received the incoming federal order. Suspend all movement. Prepare for federal inspection. She turned toward her monitor, where Caleb Marsh sat still as ever. He's not unstable, she whispered to herself. He's the reckoning they feared for years. Outside the compound, a fleet of federal vehicles was already en route. Leading them was a black unmarked sedan. In the back seat sat General Thomas Braxton, dressed in civilian clothes, a thick red dossier on his lap. Inside were declassified copies of Black Echo, signed testimonies from 3 dead whistleblowers, all accidental deaths, none with witnesses. Braxton didn't look out the window. He didn't need to. He knew the stakes. Inside Station Gray, when federal agents arrived with a signed injunction from the Attorney General himself, Ruth Mercer personally escorted Caleb out of isolation. I've read your file, she said quietly as they walked. And I'm sorry. Caleb didn't respond, but his eyes sharp, weathered, and unshaken said enough. As the final metal door opened, sunlight spilled into the corridor. Caleb Marsh stepped out into a world he had been erased from. Waiting at the gates were camera crews, veterans, protesters, and standing at the front Julia Marsh, flanked by General Braxton and Amari Nguma, the last survivor of the Sierra Leone testing camp. A wave of applause erupted. Flashbulbs lit up. Reporters shouted questions. But Caleb said nothing. He simply walked forward, locked eyes with his daughter, and embraced her for the first time in 15 years. The only words he whispered were, "We're not done yet." And he was right. Because parked 3 blocks away, a black SUV sat idle, its driver watching through binoculars. He sent a single encrypted message, target extracted. Initiate contingency plan B. The storm wasn't over. It had just begun. 3:00 a.m. The industrial zone west of Kansas City slept in silence, but inside a rusted warehouse, Detective Marcus Judd was wide awake, bleeding, bruised, and chained to a metal chair. Blood ran from a gash above his brow, soaking his collar. 3 men stood around him, masked and wordless, all but one. Brock Taylor, a former special ops turned mercenary for hire under Colonel Vincent Klein, leaned in close. "One more time," he said, calmly. "What coordinates did Marsh leave with his daughter?" "We know he buried something." Judd coughed, tasting iron. "I don't know what you're talking about." Taylor crouched beside him, voice soft. "You were at the diner. You were there when she visited. You don't strike me as stupid. So maybe you're just brave. Let's test that theory." He nodded, and a steel-toed boot crashed into Judd's ribs. Judd gasped, slumping sideways, pain lighting up his chest. Taylor leaned closer, breathing calm. "You think you're being noble? That we won't touch your little fiancée Maya if you stay quiet?" Judd's eyes flared. "Yeah," Taylor smirked. "We know everything." But Judd said nothing. Miles away, in a forested safe house outside Station Gray, Maya Marsh sat frozen in front of Zuri Ellis's multi-monitor setup. "His GPS hasn't moved for 3 hours, Zuri murmured. "He's being held. This is bad." Maya's heart dropped. She dialed. "Dad, they have Marcus." Zuri found the location. There was no panic on the other end, just steel. "Send it to Whitmore. Pack light. We move now." 45 minutes later, Caleb Marsh stood on the edge of the industrial zone with General Braxton, Zuri, and a 2-man recon team, Andrews and Whitmore, both ex-special forces. Caleb traced the building schematic with a gloved finger. For tangos. 1 hostage. Entry through the roof. Andrews, you create noise at the front. Whitmore flanks left. I go straight down. Reminds me of Kandahar, Whitmore muttered. Except there, we had support, Andrews said. Caleb looked them in the eye. We don't need support. We are the support. While Andrews set off a distraction with a firecracker charge at the front gate, Caleb and Whitmore scaled the building silently. The old tin roof groaned under their weight. Caleb cut through a ventilation shaft and dropped into a shadowed corridor. 2 guards stood by the north door. Caleb dispatched them without a sound, 1 choke hold, 1 nerve pinch. Inside the main room, Taylor pulled a knife from his belt, prepared to end Judd and vanish. But he didn't get the chance. Caleb crashed through the side door like a storm. Taylor's eyes widened. Marsh, you threatened my daughter, Caleb said quietly, voice low and lethal. Big mistake. Taylor lunged. Caleb sidestepped, twisted his arm, and slammed him into the steel wall. The knife clattered to the floor. With a precise elbow to the temple, Taylor dropped unconscious. Whitmore stormed in a second later, sweeping the room. All clear. Caleb knelt beside Judd, checking his pulse. He's alive. Barely. We've got to get him out, Whitmore said. Hospital. Not public, Caleb answered. They'll find him there. I know a place, Zuri said over comms. As they carried Judd out, Maya ran up to them, panic in her eyes. He'll make it, Caleb said. Judd opened his eyes weakly. Did I miss the fireworks? Still in progress, Maya whispered, brushing his hair back. They wanted the coordinates, he rasped. They know about the vault. Caleb froze. Then they haven't found it. Vault? Maya asked. What vault? Caleb hesitated, then answered. Before I left Sierra Leone, I buried a steel container 20 feet deep. Everything's in there. Orders, vials, hard drives. Proof of everything they did. Still intact? Whitmore asked. If it hasn't been moved. Yes. They loaded Judd into a secure vehicle. But just as the engine started, 2 black SUVs sped around the corner, headlights blinding, tires screeching. Armored mercenaries spilled out with military precision. Klein's men, Whitmore hissed. They tracked us. And they're not here to talk, Caleb added, pulling his sidearm. Andrews, get Judd out the back. Maya, go with them. Take the vault coordinates. Zuri, wipe everything after transmission. Wait, what are you doing? Maya asked. Buying time, Caleb said. You've got the evidence now. It's your turn to fight. You're not doing this again, she shouted. You don't get to disappear again. Caleb's voice softened. This time, it's a choice, not a sacrifice. He stepped into the shadows just as the firefight erupted. Gunshots cracked like thunder. Maya turned, tears streaking her face, clutching the hard drive like it was life itself. As Whitmore drove the escape van toward the mountains, Maya looked back, saw the building engulfed in smoke. She didn't know if her father would walk out again. But if he didn't, she would make damn sure the world knew why. In her lap was everything they'd tried to bury, every name, every order, every life destroyed. Caleb had stayed behind to hold the line. Now it was up to her to light the fire. And far behind them, in the last moments before the smoke swallowed the skyline, a black figure moved through the chaos with quiet, deadly grace. The ghost was still alive. And his war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The marble halls of the Capitol hadn't been this crowded in years. Reporters packed the corridor outside the Judiciary Oversight Committee, cameras rolling, microphones shoved toward anyone who looked even remotely important. Inside, the air was tense, the kind of tension that gripped the nation when something bigger than politics was unfolding, when justice itself stood on the line. A massive LED screen dominated the room's center, split between live feeds, declassified documents, and one singular face, Amari Ngoma, the lone survivor of the 2010 Sierra Leone testing camp. She sat in a chair far too large for her small frame, eyes steady but brimming with decades of pain. A congressional aide leaned into her microphone. You may begin. Amari's voice didn't tremble. My name is Amari Ngoma. I was 12 when U.S. forces raided our village under Operation Black Echo. We were told they were coming to rescue us from warlords. But what came instead were men in masks. They sprayed something into our air, into our water. We thought it was medicine. Then children started dying. Some within hours. Others, their skin changed, their lungs collapsed. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the room. And then one man came. He was different. He shouted at the others. Pulled us out. Hit us. He treated wounds with whatever he had. His name was Caleb Marsh. He saved my life. And they punished him for it. She reached into her coat and pulled out a photo of Caleb, much younger, arms around a group of survivors, including her younger self. They erased him. They called him a traitor. But he was the only human being in that hell. Across the room, Colonel Vincent Klein sat behind legal counsel, face tight with suppressed rage. "Objection to emotional testimony," his lawyer whispered. But it was too late. The room wasn't just hearing Amari, they were feeling her. As she finished, the crowd erupted into stunned silence, the kind that followed history being written in real time. A congresswoman stood. "We've now heard from survivors. Let's hear from the man himself." Cameras turned. Caleb Marsh entered the chamber like a ghost returned from the dead, stoic, gray at the temples, but with the quiet power of a soldier who'd seen too much and said too little for too long. His presence alone brought the room to a standstill. Journalists stood instinctively. Klein's face visibly paled. Caleb walked to the stand, set down a single flash drive, and looked each committee member in the eye. "Play it." The screen switched. Grainy footage from a helmet cam rolled soldiers running through jungle, screams in the background, and then a figure breaking formation. "This is wrong," the voice shouted. "These are civilians." The soldier tore his gas mask off Caleb Marsh, younger, eyes burning with fury. He was shown carrying children, fighting off his own team, shielding villagers with his own body. Then, classified emails appeared on the screen. Mission orders from Klein's desk, signed authorization for bioweapon testing, dismissals of field reports warning of humanitarian disaster. One by one, the lies were stripped bare. Then Caleb leaned into the mic. "You sent me there to be a weapon. But I wasn't the kind of weapon you could control." He paused, scanning the room. "I didn't speak because I thought silence was loyalty. I stayed hidden because I believed the system would correct itself. But all it did was protect itself. So now I speak." The chairman, visibly shaken, whispered to his aide. Across town, networks cut into programming. Millions watched as footage streamed Caleb shielding a girl while helicopters roared overhead. Marsh's name trended in every country with an internet connection. In the viewing gallery, Julia Marsh held her breath. Maya sat next to her, clutching the hard drive that had delivered the final evidence. Judd sat beside her, bruised but smiling. "He just flipped the world," he whispered. At the defendant's table, Klein stood suddenly, slamming his hand down. "This is a smear job. Fabricated nonsense from a disgraced operative." But a security aide rushed in, whispered into a staffer's ear, and handed over a fresh indictment from the Justice Department. "Vincent Klein, you are under arrest for crimes including perjury, conspiracy, and violations of the Geneva Convention," a federal agent announced. "Please stand." Klein refused. But it didn't matter. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped in. As he was led away, he shouted, "You think this ends with me? You're fools. You don't know how deep it goes." No one responded. Because in that moment, the nation wasn't focused on the man being taken down, it was focused on the man who stood his ground. The veteran who refused to die quietly. Later that day, outside the Capitol, a sea of reporters swarmed the steps. Caleb walked out with Julia on one side, Maya on the other, flanked by Whitmore, Amari, and Judd. One reporter shouted, "Mr. Marsh, what do you want the public to remember from all this?" Caleb paused. "That silence is a weapon, and I'm done letting others aim it." Then he stepped down the marble stairs, not as a ghost, not as a fugitive, but as a man who had reclaimed his name, his truth, and the right to be heard. The truth had gone public, but the reckoning had only just begun. 3 days after Colonel Klein was marched out of the Capitol in handcuffs, the world had changed. Not just in headlines, not just in trending hashtags, but in policy rooms, in courtrooms, in classrooms. Caleb Marsh sat in a quiet hospital room in Bethesda, sunlight filtering through half-closed blinds, casting soft stripes across his weathered face. He wasn't resting. He was thinking. The hearing had ended, but something inside him hadn't. Across the room, General Braxton stood with a somber expression. "The President's office wants to give you the Medal of Honor," he said carefully. "For Sierra Leone. For all of it." Caleb looked up slowly. "What about the kids who never got out? The ones whose names were wiped from records?" Braxton hesitated. "We'll list them. Every one of them. In the National Archives." "Not enough," Caleb said. "A medal doesn't rebuild what they destroyed." He stood, grabbed his coat. "But I know what might." That same day, he met with Maya, Julia, and Zuri at a community center on the south side of D.C. They laid out plans for a foundation, the Marsh Initiative, an organization built not on charity, but on accountability. It would focus on protecting whistleblowers, offering legal protection to service members, and preserving records of suppressed operations. If they can erase me, Caleb said to a crowd of young activists, they can erase any of you. The fight isn't just against injustice. It's against invisibility. Maya, now a national figure in investigative journalism, gave her first speech at Howard University. I used to think being loud made you difficult. But my father showed me something different, that silence, when forced, is violence. And truth is defiance. Across the country, stories poured in. Veterans from obscure units sharing long-buried secrets. Families writing to thank Caleb for exposing what their loved ones were too afraid to say. Survivors from foreign missions sending photos, handwritten notes, donations. One came from a boy in Sierra Leone, now 20, holding a makeshift sign, "You saved my mother. I study medicine now because of you." At Klein's federal trial, witnesses continued to testify. Contracts were pulled. Executives were subpoenaed. Ardent Strategic Solutions filed for bankruptcy. A once untouchable empire crumbled in 6 weeks. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense quietly began declassifying several shadow programs, hoping to stay ahead of public outrage. But for Caleb, redemption came not from headlines, but from a choice. One afternoon, Whitmore found him outside the Foundation's small D.C. office, watching a group of neighborhood teens fix bikes. "You sure you don't want to go on that book tour?" Whitmore teased. "Ghost Soldier sells better than Harry Potter right now." Caleb gave a faint smile. "I didn't survive all that to sit in green rooms. These kids, this is where I want to be." He reached down, tightened a bolt on a rusted bicycle, and handed it to a boy whose eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Teach him to ride," Caleb said softly. "Then teach him how to teach someone else." In Sierra Leone, weeks later, the camera crew from a global news network followed Maya as she returned to the very village where it all began. There, built on the ruins of what was once a test site, stood a small clinic and school, painted bright blue and gold. The sign above read, "Marsh Center for Justice and Healing." Inside, a group of children learned English, science, and most importantly, their own history. Caleb never joined the press tour. He didn't attend the ribbon cutting, but he sent a handwritten note, framed at the school's entrance. It read, "To the forgotten, you were always worth remembering. CM." Back in the States, Julia was offered a federal appointment in the new Office of Military Ethics. She accepted, but kept her last name Marsh. "They erased it once," she said. "They won't do it again." And Judd, fully recovered, now served as the Foundation's Director of Security and Outreach, giving talks to young cadets about morality, loyalty, and when to disobey. One night, he asked Caleb, "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Caleb looked out at the D.C. skyline, glowing amber under twilight. "I regret staying quiet as long as I did. But I don't regret who I am now." The next morning, the president awarded Caleb the Medal of Honor in a private ceremony. Caleb accepted it, then immediately turned and handed it to Maya. "Use it," he said, "as leverage, not as legacy." She held it, stunned. "What do I do with it?" Caleb smiled. "Whatever they're afraid you will." That afternoon, he vanished. No interviews, no announcements, just disappeared from the grid. Some say he returned to Sierra Leone. Others believe he lives in the mountains of Montana. But every now and then, letters arrive at the Marsh Foundation typed on an old manual typewriter, signed only C. Inside are names, dates, coordinates. More ghosts unearthed. More truth delivered. The legend of Caleb Marsh did not end in a courtroom. It began there. His legacy wasn't carved in stone, but planted in cities, villages, memory. And wherever injustice tried to bury a name, his shadow rose first, not to haunt, but to remind. The night was quiet in Sierra Leone, but not still. Crickets chirped like they had on the first night Caleb Marsh disappeared again, except this time, he wasn't fleeing. He was planning something. The Marsh Center for Justice and Healing had just completed its third building, a trauma recovery wing for children of war. It stood tall where ashes once lay, surrounded by fields of red hibiscus flowers once stained by experiments, now reclaimed by life. Inside a modest office hung a photo of Caleb, not in uniform, but smiling beside schoolchildren, one arm around a nurse, the other around a translator. Underneath the photo, carved into wood, were 5 words: "Silence is where injustice grows." But Caleb wasn't in the photo ceremony. Nor was he seen at the latest war crimes tribunal where testimonies of Operation Black Echo continued to bring down former operatives. He didn't appear at Julia Marsh's induction as the head of the newly formed Bureau for Truth and Accountability or at Maya's award ceremony for investigative excellence. He didn't call, didn't write. But every time something major happened, every time a new suppressed file leaked, a whistleblower received emergency funding, or a war orphan suddenly received an anonymous scholarship those closest to him knew, Caleb was still out there. Not as a ghost, but as a shadow behind the light. In Washington, D.C., the March Initiative had grown from a team of 5 into a national movement. Thousands of veterans, nurses, journalists, and former contractors now volunteered, investigating cover-ups, preserving evidence, mentoring young cadets. In their shared office, Maya stared at a wall full of red string and pinned photos, the expanding map of hidden injustices. Every pin, she said during an interview, was a person erased until we made noise loud enough to pull them back into history. And people were listening. Countries from South Africa to Colombia began their own versions of Marsh Truth projects, based on Caleb's blueprint. Truth first, protection second, justice always. One veteran wrote in from Okinawa, "Because of Caleb Marsh, I told the truth about what happened in 2012. My nightmares don't own me anymore." Another letter came from a mother in Detroit. "My son was dishonorably discharged for refusing an illegal order. Your lawyers got him reinstated. You gave us hope." But perhaps the most unexpected echo came from inside the very system Caleb once fought. At West Point, a new required course was launched, Ethical Defiance in Modern Warfare. It included case studies, and the final lecture was always the same: the ghost who refused to vanish. No nameplate, no glorified medals, just a lesson in conscience. General Braxton, now retired, taught it himself. He'd start every class with one line: "If the system demands silence, ask yourself, who does your silence protect?" He never said Caleb's name out loud. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. Meanwhile, in the snowy outskirts of Montana, a man walked out of a general store with only 3 things: a sack of rice, a roll of duct tape, and a local paper folded under his arm. The front page headline read, "Whistleblower reveals hidden camp in Sudan, proof of new human trials." The man nodded quietly to himself. "They're still at it," he muttered. Then he looked out at the ridgeline, where a pack of mailboxes stood frozen in ice. One bore no name, just a carved letter, C, and inside it, tomorrow, would be a single envelope with coordinates, a list of names, and a handwritten note: "Get them out before the bombs fall." The legend of Caleb Marsh no longer belonged to him. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to shut up and obey. It belonged to the broken who dared to rebuild, to the erased who clawed their way back into memory, to the guilty who found mercy, and the merciful who never stopped fighting. In classrooms, in courtrooms, in remote villages and military camps, the story of the ghost in handcuffs echoed not as tragedy, but as testimony. Not as martyrdom, but as a mandate: speak, stand, refuse, and remember. Because when the world forgets the silent, injustice thrives. But when even one person, just one, refuses to disappear, the whole world remembers what mercy sounds like. In a world where silence often protects the powerful and buries the innocent, the story of Caleb Marsh reminds us of a simple but dangerous truth: injustice survives in the shadows, and silence is its greatest ally. Caleb wasn't a superhero. He was a man who made a choice. A choice to speak when it cost him everything. A choice to protect truth over reputation, humanity over orders. The lesson is clear: your voice matters. Whether you're a soldier, a student, a nurse, or a witness to something wrong, you have more power than you think. Caleb's fight didn't end in a courtroom. It became a movement because others picked up where he left off. And now, it's your turn. If this story moved you, don't stay silent. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Every voice raised pushes back against systems that thrive on silence. Hit the like button to show you stand with those who speak up when it's hardest. And subscribe to our channel to be part of a growing community committed to justice, accountability, and human dignity. When you engage, you're not just watching, you're joining the fight to remember, to expose, and to rebuild. Let's make sure no one like Caleb Marsh is ever erased again.